Hello there. Today we're going to be looking at something very exciting. But before we go into this exciting topic, I just want to ask this very simple question. Can you imagine something like this? What do you think will happen to the Earth if the carbon dioxide level in the atmosphere is actually increased to, let's say, at least 2 to 8%? Does it have any significant effect? Does it cause any damage? Is there any influence it will create on the Earth? Now, as we discuss more on this particular topic, you will be able to answer this particular question that is being asked. Now, the topic we're going to be looking at is actually an interesting and exciting one, something that happens in our everyday life. And the topic is called nutrient cycling. We will be discussing nutrient cycling. Now, of course, you know nutrients. Now, the nutrients we're actually talking about here is not like your food, or probably they are contained in your food, but we're not looking at things like proteins. We're not looking at things like carbohydrates. We're not talking about fats and oils, but we're talking about those elements that are found in these food materials or in these so-called nutrients. And these nutrients include things like we have oxygen, we have carbon, we have phosphorus, we have sulfur, and we have water. Now, these are some essential materials or elements that needs to be cycled over and over again. In fact, they need to be available for our well-being as well as our survival as living organisms. Now, before we actually delve into most of these things we're going to discuss today, I'd like us to look at some specific objective. These are some of the things you are actually expected to be able to know and answer if you were asked questions relating to this particular topic. Now, by the end of this topic, you should be able to define what we call nutrient cycling. You should be able to give the definition for nutrient cycling. Number two, you should be able to describe what we call water cycle. You should be able to describe water cycle. I believe most of you may have known, heard about water cycle and have seen it, or it have been explained to you actually in your primary schools and also in your junior secondary. But it is very important we look at it today because it plays a very major role in what we're going to be discussing much more later. And then also, number three, you should be able to describe oxygen cycle as well as be able to describe carbon cycle. And then also where our particular question, the question I just asked, came from, we should be able to explain the carbon-oxygen balance. Is it important we maintain a balance between carbon as well as oxygen? And we're going to be looking at most of these things and many more interesting things we are going to be learning today in this topic. Now, if you are set, join me as we'll explore this particular topic on nutrient cycle. Now, first is the definition of nutrient cycle. Now, what do you think nutrient cycling is? Now, I remember I explained to you that nutrient in this regard is not actually talking about things like proteins, foods like the minerals, the vitamins you've taken, the carbohydrate you're taking. No, it is actually talking about elements that are found in these, well, I call it food nutrients, okay? Elements that are found in these food nutrients. Now, if you check in some of our videos, you will discover I made mention about mineral requirements. Now, there are several mineral requirements. These are called, elements I just mentioned can also be referred to as minerals. Now, plants and animals require them. They are divided into two. We have the one we call the major elements, and then we have the minor elements. Major elements are required in large quantities, and then minor elements are required in small quantities. Now, most of the things we're going to be discussing today, the elements we're going to be looking at today, they are major elements required in large quantity for healthy growth and development in both plants as well as in animals. Now, by definition, nutrient cycling simply means the continuous circulation of certain nutrients in nature. I repeat, it is the continuous circulation of certain nutrients in nature. Now, these nutrients, like I said, can include carbon, we have oxygen, we have water, we have nitrogen, we have sulfur, we have phosphorus, and it means that we have several types of cycles. We have water cycle, which we're going to be looking at much later. It means we have oxygen cycle, we have carbon cycle, we're looking at all of this. We have nitrogen cycle, we have phosphorus cycle, we have sulfur cycle. These are several types of cycles because these materials or these nutrients are required in large quantities and should be continuously circulated in nature. Okay, now quickly let's take a look at one of these types of nutrient cycling, and that is water cycle. Water cycle. Now, I earlier mentioned, most of you must have heard about water cycle, and you might have been taught in your primary schools what water cycle, or your basic schools, what water cycle is all about. I could vividly remember my own time. It is actually, they tell you when water goes up, it will always come down. And that is better definition I had as of then concerning water cycle. You know, the teacher will always explain, as water evaporates to the atmosphere, it comes down as rain. Now, this is still the same thing we are going to be discussing. But first of all, before we delve into the processes that are involved in water cycle, I'd like to also stretch this a little and actually say that the process of nutrient cycling is just in two ways. The process of nutrient cycling is just in two ways, or you can say it's in two stages. Now, what are actually the two stages? Now, one is nutrients moving from the earth to the atmosphere, and the second stage is nutrients from the atmosphere actually returning back to the earth for living organisms to make use of. I repeat, number one has to do with the nutrients moving from the earth or from living organisms that are on earth, and it is returning or going to the atmosphere. And then also from the atmosphere, it is returning back to living organisms on earth. And when we're going to be citing, as we look at most of these types of nutrient cycling, we're going to be exploring these two stages. So just please pay close attention to what we're saying, just these two stages. So what is water cycle? Now, water cycle can simply be defined as the continuous circulation or movement of water, like I said, from the atmosphere to the earth and from the earth back to the atmosphere. Continuous circulation. So it is something that happens throughout life. It is something that is a part of the activities in nature. Okay, so it is a continuous movement of water from the atmosphere to the earth, and then from the earth back to the atmosphere. Now, like the definition has rightly pointed, we have two main processes of water cycle. Two main processes of water cycle. Now, these two main processes of water cycle actually includes water moving from the earth to the atmosphere, and then number two is water moving from the atmosphere back to the earth. These are the two main processes that are involved in water cycling in nature. Now let's take a look at the first one, which is water moving, or the process by which water moves from the earth back, or from the earth to the atmosphere. All right. Now there are several processes that actually helps or aids the movement of water from the earth to the atmosphere. There are several processes, and we're going to explore some of these processes. Number one of those processes is what we call evaporation. Evaporation. Now, evaporation is actually the process by which liquids turn into solids, or substances that are in the liquid state are changed into the gaseous state. Now, example is water. Now, most of the water bodies we have, that is the rivers, the sea, the ocean, and the streams and all that. Now, when the sun comes up, due to the heat of the sun, or the heat energy of the sun, when heat most times is applied on water, it changes water from solid state to liquid state, and from liquid state to gaseous state. You know, water is one of the substances that can occur in these three states. Now, water in solid states has to do with the ice block, okay, your ice. Now, that is a solid water. And then it can melt. When heat is applied to it, it melts from the solid state and it goes to the liquid state and it starts flowing. And then when heat is continuously added, or yes, when heat is continuously supplied to this liquid state, the liquid states start changing from the liquid water, and then it becomes water vapor, which now goes back to the atmosphere. So one of the processes that aids the movement of water from the earth to the atmosphere is evaporation. And like I said before, evaporation is actually the movement of water, of liquid water, changing liquid water actually into gaseous water, or water vapor. Number two on the line is the process of transpiration. The process of transpiration. Now, what is actually transpiration? Transpiration is the process by which plants lose water, or get rid of excess water through the leaves. They get rid of excess water through the leaves in the form of water vapor. As we can see on the screen there, we have water leaving the plant. Also, it can also be by evaporation. Evaporation can also bring about transpiration. Okay, and there are several processes also that can bring about transpiration. Now, if you go back to our videos on respiration, I made mention of the process called respiration and transpiration, excretion are also in transport system. I made mention of, in fact, in transport system, I actually explained in details the process of transpiration. Okay, now it has to do with, it is actually controlled by the stomatal opening, the opening and the closing of the stomata. Now, transpiration is also another process by which water moves from the earth and goes to the atmosphere. Now, also another process that brings about water movement from the earth to the atmosphere is respiration. Now, what is respiration? It is, in layman's term, it can be said as, or it can be defined as breathing in and breathing out. But if you look at the chemical equation that explains respiration, you will understand that oxygen is needed to break down food substances in order to release two important byproducts. And those two important byproducts are, one is carbon dioxide, which is released to the atmosphere, and number two is water vapor. So those two things are being released during respiration, carbon dioxide as well as water vapor, mostly as it relates to aerobic respiration. During aerobic respiration, the two main byproducts are water vapor and what? Carbon dioxide. And of course, energy is always produced during respiration. That is the major purpose for respiration. So please take note of these three important processes that brings about movement of water from the earth to the atmosphere. We have the process of evaporation, We also have the process of transpiration, and then also we have the process of respiration. Now, the next stage we talked about, we said water can move from the atmosphere and return back to the earth. Now, once these things happen, once there is evaporation, there is transpiration, and there is respiration, these water go to the atmosphere and they form clouds. Now, when this cloud is full, it now pours down on the earth as rainfall. So one of the ways through which water, or one of the processes through which water moves from the atmosphere back to the earth for living organisms to make use of, is through the process called rainfall or precipitation. Rainfall or precipitation. Now, this continues throughout life and throughout nature. And that is why we said by definition, water cycle is the continuous circulation, continuous movement. So this thing keeps going on and on and on. So water cycle is also another way of conserving water in nature. Now, the next type of water cycle, before we go to the next type of water cycle, I want us to look at some of the importance of water. What are the importance of water? Water has so much importance. Number one is that water provides the medium for absorption of dissolved minerals by plants. Now, plants absorb minerals, but these minerals are dissolved in water. These minerals are dissolved in water, so the root hairs of plant can absorb them. Okay, so the root hairs of plant can absorb them by a process we know as osmosis. So one of the importance of water is that it provides the medium for the absorption of dissolved mineral salt by plants. Number two is that water aids excretion. It's very important in excretion. In fact, most excretory waste flow from where they are produced to actually where they are excreted based on the presence of what? Water. Take for instance, urine that you pass out, okay, contains water. Sweat that we pass out, it also contains water. So water is one of the factors, or actually substances, that aids the excretion of excretory products or waste products of metabolism. Number three is that water acts as a medium of transport for plant nutrients. Now, of course, like I said before, there is what we call the xylem tissues. Now, one of the functions of the xylem tissues is to transport water and dissolved mineral salts, and it cannot do it without that water being present. So water is actually helps most times in fact it acts as a transport medium. It acts as a transport medium even in the blood. Water is of more importance, an important constituent of the blood. In fact, it's actually what makes the blood to flow. It makes the blood to flow. Number four is that water provides a natural habitat for some organisms, which are referred to as aquatic organisms. Now, habitat is actually the natural dwelling place of all living organisms. And there is a type of habitat which we call aquatic habitat. Aquatic habitat, that's simply water habitat. That's what it means. So there are living organisms that find or naturally dwell in these water habitats. And of course, if you take the dwelling place of a living organism, you are exposing that particular organism to extinction. All right. So water is very, very important. Number five, water is important as an essential material for the process of photosynthesis. Now, what is photosynthesis? Photosynthesis is actually the process by which living organisms manufacture their food in the presence, listen, of carbon dioxide, now water, and sunlight. Okay, so water is necessary. In fact, it is one of the essential materials needed for photosynthesis to occur. Okay, and then also number 6, like I said before, it is a major constituent of the blood. In fact, the blood is divided into 2. We have the blood cells and we have the blood plasma. About or even over 90% of the blood plasma is made up of water. So water is an essential constituent of the blood. And then number 7, water helps to regulate body temperature. It helps to regulate body temperature. The next on the line as the type of nutrient cycle is oxygen cycle. Oxygen cycle. Now, of course, you know oxygen is very detrimental. In fact, oxygen is very needful. Let me put it that way. Very needful for survival. Now, what is the definition for oxygen cycle? Now, oxygen cycle, just the same way we defined water cycle, can be defined as the continuous circulation of oxygen in nature between living organisms and non-living organisms. Continuous circulation of oxygen or continuous movement of oxygen. So remember, when we're talking about nutrient cycling, it is something that continues throughout life. So it is the continuous circulation of oxygen. Now let's take a look at the process of oxygen cycle. Now, like I explained to you before when I was trying to point out or stretch out the stages that are actually involved during nutrient cycle. And I said it involves 2 stages. One is nutrients moving from the earth to the atmosphere, and then from the atmosphere, number 2, returning back to the earth. In the same manner, in oxygen cycle, we have these same 2 processes occurring. Now, number 1 of the process or stage is that oxygen moves now from the earth to the atmosphere, and number 2 is that oxygen is moving from the atmosphere back to the earth. Now let's explore the first process, okay, or the first stage or phase of which oxygen moving from the earth to the atmosphere. Now, what are some of the processes that are involved in this? Now, one of the processes that brings about the movement or the continuous circulation of oxygen from the earth to the atmosphere is the process of photosynthesis. Now, also, if you look at the byproducts of photosynthesis, of course, so photosynthesis makes use of water, it makes use of carbon dioxide, it makes use of sunlight, all right? But if you look at the chemical equation of photosynthesis, you will discover that the major byproduct of photosynthesis is oxygen, apart from the formation of starch or the formation of sugar. All right. Now, sugar is produced as well as oxygen is produced and energy is being used up. That's the major difference between photosynthesis and respiration. So during photosynthesis, the byproduct, one of the major byproducts of photosynthesis is oxygen. So oxygen moves from the earth to the atmosphere. So when plants photosynthesize, they give oxygen to the atmosphere. Number 2 on the line, number 2 is number 2 process that actually explains how oxygen moves from the the first one we just mentioned was oxygen moving from the earth to the atmosphere, and that is for now the only process that is involved in moving oxygen from the earth to the atmosphere. Now let's move to the next stage, which is the second stage. Now the second stage is when oxygen is moving from the atmosphere and returning back to the earth. Now, one of the processes that explains this is the process of respiration. Respiration, like we have said before, is the process by which oxygen is used. So the oxygen in the atmosphere is used by both plants and animals and all other living organisms to break down food substances in order to release energy. So during respiration, oxygen is taken from the atmosphere and used by living organisms on the earth. Is that okay? So let's look at the second process that brings about respiration. That brings about movement or continuous circulation of oxygen from the atmosphere back to the earth. Now, the second one is decay. Now, decay has to do with the breaking down of organic matter. Now, during the breaking down of organic matter, oxygen is needed. In fact, bacteria and other organisms that carry out decay, most of the bacteria that carry out decay are referred to as aerobic bacteria. So they break down organic matter in the presence of oxygen in order to release carbon dioxide to the atmosphere. So decay is one of the processes through which oxygen is drawn from the atmosphere to the earth. Number 3 on the line is combustion. As you can see on the screen, for combustion or for burning to actually take place, there must be the presence of oxygen, there must be a source of heat, and there must be a fuel, okay? A fuel. Fuel must be available, heat must be available, and oxygen must be available. Now, there's always a saying that oxygen supports burning or supports combustion. So it simply means that combustion is not possible with the absence of what? Oxygen. So this is also another way living organisms trap or take back oxygen which is in the atmosphere back to the earth. And then also, these are the take note of these 3 important processes through which oxygen from the atmosphere returns back to the earth. We talked about the process of respiration, we talked about the process of decay, and then we have looked at the process of combustion. There are also other processes you might have located in several textbooks, but these are 3 important processes that brings about the movement or the continuous movement of oxygen from the atmosphere back to the earth. And the one that takes oxygen from the earth to the atmosphere is the process of photosynthesis. Now, before we shift to another type of nutrient cycling, let's take a look at importance of oxygen. Remember when we started looking at oxygen cycle, I told you that oxygen is of great importance to living organisms. One of the importance is that it ensures the continuation of life. Have you ever imagined how many minutes or how long you can stay without oxygen or respiration? From resource gathered, it is about 4 to 6 minutes. In fact, from 4 to 6 minutes, your brain starts shutting down, okay? Or you get a brain damage. If you stay up to 10 minutes, you're going to die, all right? So oxygen is very vital. It is a vital nutrient needed and required in all living organisms. Number 2 is that the more oxygen is added to the atmosphere, it ensures the purification of air. Now, air is actually a mixture of gases, we all know, and air consists of several components. We have oxygen, we have nitrogen, we have carbon dioxide. Now, the more you add air, in fact, air pollution can simply be redefined as the process by which the oxygen content in air is reduced. It is not only when harmful substances are added to the atmosphere, but it also anything that brings about the reduction in the amount of oxygen in a particular atmosphere or a place brings about air pollution. And also, the more oxygen added to the atmosphere, it brings about air purification. And you know, plants during photosynthesis, they give out oxygen, and that is why it is very advisable in residential areas trees are to be planted. It is good to have plants or trees all around because they help to purify that particular atmosphere where you are found. All right. Number 3, importance of oxygen is combustion. Now, what the third part is that oxygen brings about combustion. Now, we have mentioned this severally, that oxygen brings about combustion, and this combustion is useful domestically as well as industrially. Mostly in the industries, combustion is highly needed for production of several products. And also domestically, we need oxygen for cooking and so many other things we use. Combustion rather. We need combustion for cooking and so many other processes. So these are 3 importance of oxygen to living organism. Number 1, we said that it brings about, it ensures the continuation of life. And number 2, we said that it brings about air purification. And then number 3, it brings about combustion, which is useful both domestically as well as industrially. Now, quickly, let's look at the third type of nutrient cycle, and we call this carbon cycle. Now, by definition, carbon cycle is still the continuous circulation of carbon in nature, just the same way we define the water cycle as well as the oxygen cycle. Now, in terms of carbon cycle, the same thing we did for water cycle as well as oxygen cycle. Carbon cycle is divided into, or the process of carbon cycle is divided into 2 main stages or phases. The first one we're going to be looking at is carbon moving from the atmosphere to the earth in form of carbon dioxide. Please note, in form of carbon dioxide, because carbon is found in carbon dioxide. And then number 2 is carbon moving from the atmosphere back to the earth in form of carbon dioxide. So plainly, what we're going to be looking at is how carbon dioxide is added to the atmosphere, and then carbon dioxide is removed from the atmosphere. Now let's look at the first stage, in which carbon or carbon dioxide is moved from the earth to the atmosphere. We're going to be looking at 3 important processes through which this can happen. Number 1 is called respiration. Now, of course, you know that during respiration, oxygen is being used up to break down food substances in order to release carbon dioxide. So during respiration, carbon dioxide is released, as well as water vapor is released to the atmosphere. So this is also one of the processes by which carbon dioxide, or which carbon, is added to the atmosphere. Number 2 on the line is decay. Now, during decay, oxygen is needed to break down organic matter, and one of the byproducts during decay is the release of CO2 gas, which is carbon dioxide gas, which is released out also to the atmosphere. And then number 3 is combustion. Now, when you are burning things, once combustion starts taking place, one of the byproducts of combustion is what? CO2, or carbon dioxide. So carbon dioxide is also a byproduct of combustion. So in other words, what we are trying to say is that during the process of carbon moving from the earth to the atmosphere, we have respiration, we have combustion, and then we have also decay. Now, the next stage has to do with carbon moving from the atmosphere back to the earth. And how does it do that? The process is mostly through photosynthesis. So photosynthesis is also another process, or is one of the major processes through which carbon dioxide moves from the atmosphere back to the earth. Now, if you have been paying attention, you will understand that there is a similarity between oxygen cycle as well as carbon cycle. in our further discussion, when we start looking at the importance of carbon and oxygen balance, I'm going to come back with this particular discussion. Now, moving ahead is importance of carbon. How is carbon important to life? What are the importance of carbon to living organisms? Number one is that carbon is the major building block of all organic matter. In fact, both plants and animals are made up of carbon. It is the building block of all organic matter. Number two is that organic matter, which is made from carbon, helps to replenish soil nutrients. That is, when they are decomposed. When organic matters are decomposed, or organic matter simply talks about decomposed plants and animals, decomposed plants and animal. And that is why loamy soil is referred to as the best soil, because of the high proportion of organic matter present in it. Okay, so organic matter, they help to replenish soil nutrient. And of course, I've said this, organic matter are mainly made up of carbon. They are mainly made up of carbon. Number three is that carbon can be obtained by plants from air to manufacture their food. So photosynthesis is necessary for plant survival. Plants feed, plants get or manufacture their own food through the process of photosynthesis. And one of the essential factor that is, or conditions responsible for photosynthesis, is the availability of carbon dioxide, which is also a form of what? Carbon. All right. So these are some of the importance of carbon to living organisms. Now, finally, before we go, let's look at a carbon-oxygen balance. Is there a need for carbon-oxygen balance? Now, remember when we discussed oxygen cycle, we said that the process by which oxygen moves from the atmosphere to the earth is through, that is from the atmosphere to the earth, is through respiration, through decay, and through combustion. Now, if you compare it with carbon cycle, we said that is the way through which carbon is moved from the earth to the atmosphere. So they are alternating. Also, the process through which oxygen moves from the earth to the atmosphere, we call that photosynthesis. All right? We said that photosynthesis is one way through which oxygen moves from the earth to the atmosphere. But in terms of carbon cycle, it is one of the processes through which carbon from the atmosphere comes back to the earth. They are also alternating. All right. Now, it is important to note that there is a need for the carbon-oxygen balance to be maintained. Now, by several of our activities like combustion and also action of the volcanoes and so many other things we do and so many other natural phenomena, it can bring about increase in oxygen level. Remember, I told you if there is an increase in the oxygen level in the atmosphere, it purifies the atmosphere. In fact, it brings about air purification. Also, if there is a decrease in oxygen level, about 2 to 8% in the atmosphere, well, it is not good. It brings about air pollution, but it does not create a significant effect. The effect is not significant or so important. But if you compare that of carbon, a decrease in carbon level in the atmosphere, fine, it brings about air purification. But a slight increase, about 2 to 8%, just the same way we have for oxygen. A slight increase, remember, a slight decrease in oxygen level can bring about, because most of the processes that brings about decrease of oxygen is what brings about the increase of carbon dioxide. So a slight increase in the carbon dioxide level for about 2 to 8%, it will cause a significant effect. Why? It brings about the accumulation of carbon dioxide in that atmosphere. And carbon dioxide is referred to as what we call a greenhouse gas. And greenhouse gas brings about greenhouse effect. So it makes the world, or it makes the globe, that particular area, to be warm or hot. So greenhouse effect also leads to what we call global warming. Greenhouse effect leads to global warming. And of course, you know, global warming has never been a better, or has no good effect or positive effect on the globe or the earth at large. Hence, there must be a maintenance of carbon-oxygen balance. So it is very important that most of the activities we carry out should ensure, we should try as much as possible to ensure that we maintain this carbon-oxygen balance. And also I want to also advise, or sort of like lend a voice to afforestation and reforestation. Planting of trees, disregard the process of bush burning, overgrazing. These are some of the process that reduces the oxygen level, brings about a decrease in oxygen level, and somehow increases the carbon dioxide level in our atmosphere. So this is where we're going to stop for this particular class. But before I go, I want us to take a look at some questions using the ExamGuide app. Very quickly, we'll just pick very few questions, probably 1 or 2 or probably 3 questions that has to do with what we have discussed so far. Now, take a look at question 1. It said, which among the processes removes water from the water cycle? The processes that removes water from water cycle. Is it condensation? Is it perspiration? Is it photosynthesis? Is it respiration? Now, what removes water mostly from, when they say water cycle, we're now attributing it, something that removes water from the atmosphere. Or probably is it what removes water from the atmosphere? Yes. And that correct answer is perspiration. Remember, perspiration, I told you, or we can call it precipitation, is also a process of rainfall, removing water from the atmosphere. Okay, so that is what we call perspiration. Next, we have number 2 question. The stunted growth, okay, this one is under nutrient cycle. We're going to be talking about that much later. Still on nutrient cycle. Now look at this. The water cycle is maintained mainly by evaporation and condensation of water in the environment. Evaporation and condensation of water in the environment. Now, one question that has to do with carbon cycle. Now, carbon 4 oxide content of the atmosphere is least affected. So which one affects carbon 4 oxide in the atmosphere? Is it burning of fossil fuels? Is it cutting down and clearing of forest? Is it plant and animal respiration? And is it forest fires? So what reduces carbon dioxide level in the atmosphere? When you burn something, carbon dioxide is added to the atmosphere. Cutting down and clearing forest, for carbon is not added to the atmosphere. Plants and animal respiration, during respiration, carbon is released to the atmosphere. And also during forest fires that are burning, carbon is added to the atmosphere. So the correct answer there is B. The correct answer there is B. Thank you for participating in today's class. You can practice more questions using your ExamGuide app. The app scores and gives a detailed explanation of all the questions at the end of your practice test. You can also learn particular topics of interest with different modes like study mode, mock mode, and even practice mode. It also has other features that makes learning very fun. Now, it is a must for all serious students. Download from www.examguide.com if you don't have it yet. See you in the next class. Don't forget to subscribe to our channels, hit the notification bell, and share the videos to your loved ones and friends that will benefit from it. Bye for now.